that China or Rome were ever in direct contact. The reason being that in between them lay Persia, which was always at war with Rome, and through which communication was always difficult. But we do have very detailed knowledge of the extent of the communication between Rome and India. And this extraordinary head of the Buddha, the Berenike Buddha, which was dug up in an excavation only 3 years ago, is part of that story. This is a figure of the Buddha carved in Proconessian stone from the Marmarasi near Istanbul. But the style is Gandharan, modern Pakistan or Afghanistan. The Buddha himself, of course, is from India. And yet it was found in a temple to the goddess Isis on the Red Sea coast of Roman Egypt. A measure of the forgotten amplitude. We're familiar with Buddhism going eastwards as far as Japan and Korea. We're less familiar with the notion that it went also westwards. So let's talk about Buddhism first of all. First thing to be said, I suppose, is that the Buddha is a historical character. He lived in the 5th century BCE. One of the quirks of Buddhism is that during his lifetime, and indeed for the following 200 years, Buddhism did not spread far outside the territory where the Buddha lived and preached. He was born in Lumbini, now just over the border in Nepal. He had his enlightenment in Bodh Gaya, now in Bihar of all places. He then preached his first sermon in Sarnath in Uttar Pradesh. And Buddhism does not spread far out of that until the Emperor Ashoka adopts it. And the Emperor Ashoka sends out Dharma ministers. And the Dharma ministers are known to have reached as far as Cyrene, which is modern Libya. So we have detailed inscriptional evidence of what today we would call missionaries, passing out through Anatolia, through Egypt, through North Africa, right across. But it also spreads through the Deccan. And we have the wonderful spread to Ajanta, this extraordinary figure of Padmapani, and holding the lotus, the Padma, in his hand as Ajanta. And Buddhism spreads southwards from the Gangetic Plain, down through the Deccan, on as far as Sri Lanka. And in last year, 2 years ago, in Rajagala in the central Sri Lanka, the stupa, the original stupa of Mahinda, who was the son of Ashoka, who brought to Sri Lanka Buddhism, was found as recently as 2 years ago on the hill of Rajagala in central Sri Lanka. And an inscription on this stupa on the right. We're used to the sort of stupa we see on the left here, where you have the perfect hemisphere, and it's all very familiar from Sanchi or a million other big sites. What we're not used to is, if you like, the prototype form, which is on the right. These early saucer-shaped stepped stupas, which represent the first generation. I've seen similar things in Nepal around Lumbini, with these very low saucer-shaped stupas, which represent the earliest form of Mauryan stupas. And Mahinda converts the king of Sri Lanka, and from that point, the island of Sri Lanka becomes a major center of the Buddhist mission. And over the next 200 years, with incredible speed, we see Buddhism spread around the world. It spreads northwestwards through modern Pakistan and modern Afghanistan into what will become Uzbekistan today. It spreads from Sri Lanka through Burma, across the Bay of Bengal to Cambodia and Thailand. It spreads through Tibet up into China, and from China into Mongolia, and then eastwards from China to Korea and Japan and ultimately the Philippines. So in just 300 years, in one of the most extraordinary moments of soft power conquest in world history, almost all of Asia adopts Buddhism as a philosophy. Indian languages such as Prakrit and later Sanskrit become familiar over the great width of Asia. Indian ideas of geography, of time, of cosmology spread with this. It's not just Buddhism itself, it's a whole package of Indic ideas, and they spread out incredibly all the way to Japan in a matter of 200 or 300 years. There are very few equivalents to this in world history of the peaceful, entirely peaceful spread of Buddhist ideas. Islam and Christianity both spread in part through conquest. But Buddhism does not involve the unsheathing of a single sword, the throwing of a single spear, a single dead body on its passage. And importantly, it's not a political conquest. A lot of the early Indian scholars of the 1930s saw in the spread of Buddhism and Hinduism, they called it the Hindu colonies in Southeast Asia. We now know that to be wrong. What happened was more extraordinary than that, because military conquests are common throughout any period of history. The strong invade the weak. That is the norm. What is very, very unusual is the transcontinental spread of a set of ideas entirely because of their sophistication, because they are attractive, because they help people in their lives, because they help them understand the nature of suffering and to beat suffering. This is the motivational force behind the spread of Buddhism. And as I say, we now know that the spread includes the spread of Buddhism to Egypt. This extraordinary discovery last year proves what has been hinted at in several sources, that there was a Buddhist presence in Egypt. And this is the notion that I'm trying to take on, this idea, very attractive, that there is like a motorway connecting China to the West. But if you look at that map, India is a void. We barely notice it because we're so familiar with that notion of the Silk Road. But India is just the Himalayas. There's not a port, there's not a town. The reality is that it is India, not China, that in the classical period is the greatest exporter both of trade and of ideas. And China takes on an Indian religion. By the 6th century, as we'll see a little later in this lecture, China becomes a Buddhist state. Now there's no reverse yet, there's no point at which Taoism or Confucianism takes over even Sri Lanka or Tamil Nadu or something. We never have Chinese ideas taking root here, but a big Indian philosophical system takes over China. And that is partly reflective of the trade patterns of the time, because Indian ideas travel with merchants. Today we slightly romanticize Buddhism, particularly in the Hollywood version. You imagine sort of Buddhist monks almost levitating like Marvel superheroes or something. In reality, Buddhism was rooted in the merchant classes. It spread through trade, and it appealed to the urban middle class, who saw in Buddhism a way to ease their suffering, but also it found that it allowed them through, if you like, greenwashing their fortunes to pay off their karma. You give money to a Buddhist monastery, bingo, all your sins are forgiven. So you find that Buddhist monasteries far more than we expect to believe, are connected with trade routes. The Buddhist monasteries act as caravanserais. They also act as banks. The first banks in India are monasteries. And we have inscriptions, for example, in Andhra Pradesh, of a man who calls himself a Mahanavi, a great saint. And he says, and this is an inscription at the end of his life when he's repaying the monastery, the money that he's borrowed and the interest he's had to it. He's saying, I hereby, with this inscription, certifying that I have repaid my loan with interest to the monks. My father was a rice farmer. He belonged to the agricultural class. Through a loan from the monks, I was able to buy a ship, became a Mahanavika, became a great sailor, and made my fortune in Suvarnabhumi, the lands of gold in Southeast Asia. I sailed back. The white stupa guided me into port at the top of the monastery, and I'm now repaying my loan. We have many inscriptions of that nature. So it is in the wake of India's domination of the sea roads that Buddhism and Indian ideas spread. So my evidence for the dominance of Indian ideas and trade is partly this. Look, this is a map of Roman coins. Now, if the Silk Road actually existed in the ancient period, you would expect to see Roman coins passing along that horizontal line from the Mediterranean to the South China Sea. Where do they actually exist? Well, very clearly, Roman coins obviously found mostly in Europe, in the Roman Empire. But where are the outliers? The Black Sea, the Nile, little orange trail going down. But is there a horizontal line going along the map where the Silk Road is meant to be? No, nothing. Where is the next big orange cluster? South India and Sri Lanka, the bottom right-hand corner of the map. Very, very clear. Because it is in India that you find the most Roman coins outside the Roman Empire. Where? In Kerala, in Tamil Nadu. There are more Roman coins in Indian museum collections than in any other country outside the Roman Empire. And this has been forgotten about. It's been forgotten, this trading prowess. And one of the reasons that India was so good at this is the monsoon winds. You see above India, you see Tibet. At this moment, Tibet is frozen over. Cold winds are raking in to the wintry Tibet, to Lhasa. But in about 2 months' time, it is Basant today, we can feel the beginnings of the heat coming back. In 2 months' time, that heat will be radiating down on the Tibetan plateau, and the winds will start blowing out from there during the thaw. And that, on the continental scale that you can see in this map, creates one of India's unique gifts, which is the monsoon winds, which blow one way for 6 months and back again for the other 6 months. In a country never known for punctuality, the monsoon winds until modern times were always incredibly punctual. And from March through till August, the winds blew out from India, blowing you towards the Red Sea and towards Egypt. And then on the other side, from the east coast, through the Malacca Straits to Cambodia and beyond to China. Then they reverse, and you blow back. And so you have to be, by August, by the shores of the Red Sea, and you get driven back in just 6 weeks. So rather than a lengthy, difficult, and dangerous journey overland along the Silk Road, a German idea from the 19th century, which Marco Polo never refers to, or any other trader, there is no mention of the Silk Road before the 19th century. Instead of that, we have the monsoon routes. And the monsoon routes mean that you can go from Muziris, Kerala, to Berenike on the Red Sea shore of Egypt in 6 weeks. You can then go to Alexandria, do your business, pyramids, go and see a show, do your thing. Then you have to be back at the Red Sea by August, and 6 weeks later you're home in Kerala or Gujarat or Sindh. And that has been one of India's great secret advantages. Where I come from in Scotland, winds blow in crazy directions 10 times a day, but in India the winds are consistent. out 6 months, in 6 months, which has meant that Indian sailors, that's why we have communities of Desis living in Tanzania, in Kenya, on the East African coast, and again in Singapore, in Southeast Asia, because the winds have blown them out and provided an easy route home. So my contention is that we've been looking at completely the wrong place when we talk about the Silk Road. In reality, the Silk Road never really existed until the Mongol period, when Genghis Khan did smash a motorway from China to the Mediterranean. And that did allow Marco Polo in 1271 to cross very quickly overland. But at any other time in history, it was impossible because Rome and Persia, or Byzantium and Iran, were at war. Instead, the most important routes in antiquity, as this map of Roman coins hints, is the sea roads. It is India, not China, that is dominant, and it is the sea roads, not the overland route, which is the key to it. And there are many things on the way that we have forgotten. For example, you look at Buddhist monuments, you often see these figures in the right and in the middle, these Ethiopians, which of course, if you look at the map, is just midway between the two. When you go up the Red Sea coast, map, Nairobi and these are the Ethiopian capitals. So it's not just the sea road between India and Egypt. There are other participants in these roads that we've forgotten about. And now, thanks to this document, the Mosiris Papyrus, we actually have detail of the figures. This is what economic historians love, because there's data. Now, the Mosiris Papyrus is simply a shipping invoice from the 1st century AD, of the sort that's made out in Cochin Port or any of the Mumbai port or anywhere today. And it is the contents of one container, as in modern times, merchants buy a container, they fill it with goods, and they